Hello. Hi. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. We are content editors from BBC Sounds, and we dress alike. So if that's what, it's this BBC uniform, which we're very pleased that we follow suit. My name's Nicky Birch, and I run a new formats and innovation team in BBC Sounds.
And my name's Conneely. I'm the head of metadata and publishing management in the BBC Sounds team.
And today we're going to talk about what's next for BBC Sounds, but also kind of what we've been doing over the last year. We're going to give a kind of précis over some content innovation and talking about a number of things like our innovation highlights, how we grow our audience, and some of our ambitions in going forward.
Yeah, so today we're going to cover, as you can see, starting down here with exactly what's been going on for the last year and where we're looking out to into the future. So I think...
Should we go on to the... Content highlights. And there will be some time for some questions at the end. So if you do have anything, just kind of note them down and you can pick up later. There's still some people coming into the room. Hello at the back. Come and settle down. We're just starting. Okay, so just first, some numbers from BBC Sounds. There has been a lot of plays last year on BBC Sounds. Particularly, our sort of tagline is music, radio, podcasts. Like many other broadcasters, we have one app that does multiple things. These are published from 2022, so they're from January to December rather than financial year. Of that, we have over 582 million on-demand plays. And podcasts especially have seen a kind of big jump. This is a 12% increase from last year. And we're really happy as well that on-demand music mixes have also seen a big increase from 2021.
And I think for me, one of the things that's really interesting is the change in the way that people are listening between live and on-demand. So while in terms of hours, on the left-hand side there, you can see that it really is still 2-to-1 basically in favour of live listens. Sounds is an excellent live radio app, and we see 2/3 of our hours are being spent there in the live listen. But in terms of number of clicks now, what we've got is near parity. So 47% of clicks or plays in Sounds are for on-demand content. So it's a big change from where we have been in the past.
And some of the highlights from last year show a really good mix of, these are our top performing podcasts from last year. And these are a mix of drama, true crime, sort of just one thing is a kind of, if you do just one thing this week, this will improve your well-being. And also some of our fantastic long-running titles like Newscast, and some of our more reactive news podcasts like Ukrainecast and Putin.
And I think probably one of the things to note here is we've got a real mix of short-run series like Putin, but things that are always on, things that are coming back in recommissions but with gaps between their series, like You're Dead to Me and Bad People. So some of these are established, some of these are things that come through reacting to the news, some of them are dramas. There's a really good mix of things that people are consuming on Sounds.
And just to kind of go into a bit more detail about our recent successes, so this is from the last few months. We've had a fantastic array of kind of new titles, and it's worth saying we're growing. Our audiences are getting better and better, so we're having record weeks. For the last few months, it's continuing to grow.
And I think one of the reasons we picked out, particularly the top row here, is that these are places where we've set up an RSS feed or a brand of content and then gone back and put in a second season or subsequent seasons that are not that are thematically related rather than direct follow-ons from the previous season. So the center one, Sports Strangers Crimes, in that same feed, in that same area in Sounds, you'll find a story about horse racing, a different football scandal, and then the most recent one, Spygate, obviously about Formula One.
A bit like Slow Burn, which is another session that's on right now, right? So,
Thank you for not going to that.
Thank you for not coming. We appreciate that. But one thing I just want to point out, so the Shamima Begum story is the second series in an umbrella brand called I'm Not a Monster. It's an amazing bit of journalism. So if you haven't heard it, please do have a listen. So we launched that this year. It's just finished last week. And once we launched the second series, different story around the same theme about somebody going to ISIS and joining ISIS, we saw a massive uptake in listens for the original first series. So there's a sort of benefit of launching them under one brand.
And I guess that sort of, one of the takeaways there is about that difficulty we all have with constantly launching from 0 subscribers, thinking about ways we can extend the things that we've done well, where we've already got an audience interested, engaged and waiting, leaving them there and then starting in a new place and expecting them to come find us again. We're adding friction that doesn't need to be there. Yeah. So that's something we're really focusing on for the coming year.
Yeah, and the bottom titles are titles that we've worked with our radio stations, in this case Radio 2, which is our kind of heartland music radio station, and we've worked with some key talent, and they're producing music mixes that sit both on the linear and also on demand, and they've done really well as well. So we're really pleased at the successes of those.
And then I guess, apart from what we commission, there's a really important aspect to how we curate, and particularly how we curate around live events. Because unlike many competitor platforms in our market, we have a lot of similarities with our public service partners, public service broadcasters around Europe and the world, where we're also expected to reflect what's going on in our home countries. So for us, we have a top element of our app, both on web and TV, everywhere, in mobile. That's something that we can turn on that links to either live listening or on demand, which has been an incredible boon for us. So here we can see last year's commentary for Eurovision Grand Final.
Ken Bruce, R.I.P.
But then obviously we can then supplement that on the next slide with other curations taking over different, what we call rails on our homepage, and doing a Eurovision takeover here, where we bring in a bunch of Eurovision content that can be listened to on demand to support that live listen.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone doesn't think that we go Eurovision mad, the BBC, I can tell you, is crazy about Eurovision this year. There will be probably twice as much Eurovision content on the BBC in, months' time.
And then I guess the other thing here is how helpful that is for us in terms of covering breaking news. That we're not a news app, but we are expected to reflect things as they're happening, and we think it's really important to be able to provide that as quickly as possible. So in this case, I've put this up where sometimes we're not even waiting for finding the right image. We just want to start pushing people to 5 Live News. So this is when we hear it, Boris Johnson's going to resign. Our curation team immediately throws up a link to 5 Live. So the first thing people see when they open Sounds is a breaking news, quick, get you straight to the news, least friction possible. You're listening to a live station within a few seconds. And then obviously, then we update it. As soon as we have got a picture of him at Downing Street, something suitable, we'll then move on to a sort of a more rich, better metadata, nicer image, more attractive.
Yeah, and the great thing about these we call them single item promos, is that they can link to live news or live content or on-demand content, whatever we decide we want to promote.
And then I guess I also really wanted to touch on one of our biggest challenges of last year was the way that the passing of the Queen played out in the UK and in UK media. So on the day we were having announcements, the way that Sounds reacted was to immediately start thinking really carefully about what else was curated on that page and to start putting these promos on about the latest on the Queen's health. So this is before any announcement's been made. Now, there have long been plans in the BBC for the type of thing that we then saw of all of the schedules being cleared to cover pre-recorded remembrance content. So on the next slide, we can see we changed the promo to that, but if you look up the top, every radio station had an identical image that was all prepared as the stations changed over to this rolling coverage.
It's a really difficult time for curation when you're looking at something like that, when you have this obituary process and you're having to have an image like that on the front of your page where everything is the same. So you can imagine it's quite a tough time, and you're trying to work out when is the right time to bring normal content back as well.
And I guess it was also interesting in terms of the balance between automation and humans, because ultimately this wasn't something that we could easily encode in our recommendations engine. So the recommended for you stuff that would normally be there, we just entirely switched off for the 10 days of the morning period.
And yeah, actually we did this thing as well where we are also involved in the Alexa content, Alexa output. So we had to, I'll come on to explain a bit more about that, but we have local news bulletins on Alexa and they're not updated as frequently. So we had to immediately cancel all of them because you didn't want to have a news bulletin that was out of date, that didn't say the Queen had died. And so there's all sorts of much more complicated kind of series of events that we had to go through. And I mean, being in the BBC on that day was quite a tense moment. I'm sure Sam will probably agree. you're doing newscast. It was quite an eerie place to be when you sort of knew that she was about to pass away, possibly, and everything that people had trained for kind of years and years was about to kick in.
And I guess also because, like, just bringing us onto the pictures you can see here, this is a sense of what we were displaying to people to try and do a combination of remembrance content during the official mourning period, but also balance it with other things that were happening and other appropriate things that people might want to escape from the persistence of that remembrance message that was happening throughout the UK for that long period.
Yeah, we haven't even mentioned queues, have we?
No.
Which was quite a mental kind of time when everyone was just filming people and being in a queue. So one of the things that is quite a new piece of work that we launched just on Friday is our GCSE revision podcasts. So in the UK, post-16 exam are called GCSEs, and we have, for the first time, we've done a collaboration with our education team, which is called Bite Size, and Bite Size is a very key bit of the BBC where they really support the curriculum in terms of learning, and were very crucial to lockdown learning, actually. And so what we've done is create a series of revision podcasts in conjunction with educational specialists, and they are particularly focusing at biology and English, because those are the two titles that people are most likely to go to Bite Size to ask for help on, and some study support titles. And so we have, for example, in English, there is 6 episodes, each 10 minutes long, on Macbeth, 6 episodes on an Inspector Calls, on these key curriculum titles that are kind of completely linked to what they're learning and how to help them pass exams. And the thinking behind this is that a lot of young people are not on sounds, right? This is really, they're on TikTok and YouTube and all the things we know about. And actually, it's really hard for us to try and bring young audiences into sounds. And actually, I sometimes think that, and in the BBC in general, in many ways, sometimes Bite Size is the last experience they're going to have at the BBC until perhaps, apart from maybe watching Match of the Day, which is their, Premier League football. And so it's like, okay, how can we get in there while at this age where they're still, they need this educational help, and then at the same time have lots of trailers for other existing sounds content and showcase other great relevant podcasts and live content that they're going to enjoy. So it's a pilot. There's 120 episodes in total, so it's quite a significant pilot, but we're hoping, should it be successful, to then roll it out to other things like history and chemistry. And we'll see how that goes. Hopefully, I'll be back next year saying it was a huge success, and they've all enjoyed it.
And then moving on to some innovation highlights. Anyone who was at the Future of Podcasting will have heard a little bit about our first acquisition trial. This is something that we've been trialling over the last few months, of publishing content that's freely available in RSS, obviously in agreement with podcasters, but choosing content, adding it into sounds to effectively work more closely with podcast makers and to provide that extra listen for our sounds users. So what we've done here is license that content, a non-exclusive license. It stays on RSS. We aim to get it out the same day, the same time as the RSS episode goes out, but very similar to the way the market works, where you'd get an ad deal, our payment method is based around the volume of listens. So for us, it's a shared endeavour with the podcaster. We're trying to make it a long-term thing. We license content for much longer than we might normally for radio, so talking about 3 to 5 years, that we want to be able to keep working with a podcaster. It won't always work that way. We know that from the trial, but the aim is here to build a long relationship with independent podcasters in our industry, in our market, and try and sort of do some development there. So looking on to the next slide, the great thing for us here, because internally from commissioning areas, there's a real sense of nervousness about whether or not it would effectively just push existing users away from BBC commission content and onto things that fancy, shiny things that I'd bought in. And in fact, what we actually saw was the people who listened to acquisition titles extended their listening time with us by the length of the time they spent with the acquisition. This was all additive for us. So this is how to, so essentially it's really key to remember here, what this worked for us for was retention. So these are not going to be we're acquiring the content, but we're not going to acquire listeners. We're not going to transfer listeners from RSS. That's not the goal. The goal here is to work closely with podcast makers, but also start to extend the listening and thinking of the way that our core audience, the people who already love sounds, and get them thinking about some of the sort of more stretchy content that we do, using this as a bit of a bridge. And for us, the things that work best were those things that were linked really closely with stuff we were already doing. The example I had up there before was we launched Lady Killers with Lucy Worsley, a commissioned piece of content, and we acquired She Done It, the wonderful podcast by Carolyn Crampton, which is one woman making an excellent podcast about the golden age of detective fiction. And then what next? It's been a really successful trial for us, not with every single title. Like any commissioning slate, some things have flown and some things haven't. But effectively, we're now looking at phase 2, spreading the message out more, starting to engage with more titles, more partners, different ways of thinking about that. Still a really strong focus on contributing to the UK market, so therefore our really strong focus there will be UK-produced podcasts. And not sure what the final shape of the project will be, but to give you a sense of scale, we're publishing everything ourselves. We don't just take directly off RSS. We check that it complies with the BBC's editorial guidelines. It's a fairly manual process, which means we're talking about dozens of podcasts, not thousands or millions.
Another really great project that has happened in the last year on sounds is Audio Labs, and I think Leanne Ali has talked about this in perhaps one of the other sessions, so you may have heard this, but it's a development and training program that we run for new and upcoming podcast producers, and it's just in its second year now. So what we did last year, these are the people who we brought on board last year, and what they did is they submitted an idea for a podcast. And they, there was hundreds and hundreds of people who submitted an idea for a podcast, which is fantastic. And these guys got selected, and they work with teams of exec producers like Leanne, who you may have seen here. And she helped them develop these titles, which they then were published last year. And they're all on Sounds, and we helped promote them properly and did a proper launch for all of those titles. And some of them have gone on to do further work for the BBC and flown off and done whatever else they want to do. And now, as I said, the round is open, and we're now currently in the process of sifting through another set of podcast ideas. And I think this is fantastic. This is like core public service, right? You know, we want to lift up people and kind of help them grow and support new content from makers who we wouldn't necessarily have heard from. So this is a really fantastic program.
And I think, in addition to that, it's worth thinking about, like, what does a public service bring to this kind of a project? Why can't people just pick up a microphone and make it themselves? And some of the stuff we saw through this was huge benefits of being able to use the BBC archive for some of these projects, have access to our legal team for some of the things that you needed legal advice on. So rights clearance and all those types of things, we actually did have expertise and value to add into that in a way that, you know, that question between do I pitch or do I just start making myself, thinking about how it is that you can make sure that all those efforts are marshaled around people that have in incubation programs like this was really valuable.
I'm just going to go over to the deck. Turn this. Oh, there we go. It's on. Okay, so something else I wanted to show you is some playlists that we've been working on. I've seen some really interesting examples of this in this conference elsewhere from ABC and Swedish Radio and Zetland. I think lots of people doing some really interesting curated playlists of speech content. Thank you. And what we've been doing something similar, both in speech playlists, but also in music and on demand as well. And in sounds, they're called back-to-back sounds. So in the case of, I'm just going to talk you through some of the spoken word playlists. So it's curated playlists around themes, which kind of manually curated and help kind of, you can either have a press play linear experience, or you can skip through. I've got a little video, and hopefully this works. Here we go. Can you see that? Yeah, so we've got a series of playlists in our back-to-back sound speech. This one is about classic archive from the BBC. This was in comedy. Here we go, a kind of wind-down one. This one is about all day, everyday football that's updated. I'm going to come on to talk about the news in a sec. And you can also make these topical, related to, let's say, somebody dies, or you want to kind of do something just about them. This one here is about celebrities. All the celebrities that are on Radio 1, our pop music program, we clip these out. And some of these programs are, some of these clips, it's worth saying, are manually clipped out, and some are automated. So we're doing this process now where, I don't know if I just scroll it on a tiny bit more, we might be able to see. There's a feature called All the Latest Things in Greg James. There we go. Can you see that? And he's our breakfast show presenter on Radio 1. He has a feature every day, roughly the same time, called All the Latest Things, where he sort of talks about what people are talking about on TikTok, or what people are talking, what people are chatting about. All the latest things, in this case, Lizzo. And what we do is we are able to put markers in our playout system, we call VCS, our playout system, at the beginning and at the end. Every time, if you hear a certain jingle, which he plays, they fire off at the beginning of this feature, and then a marker which says at the end when you play the outgoing jingle. And what it does is it automatically extracts that, puts a jingle on the front, adds an image to it, and publishes it on BBC Sounds. So that's the kind of way where we're just exploring how do we work with linear content and turn that into on-demand content in a more automated way. It doesn't work for everything because everyone isn't a feature at a set time, and there's only certain things that works for. But we're just exploring this, and I think it's really interesting. I'm going to skip to the next one. Can I do that? Yeah. Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the news one that we're doing, and this is called the News Catch Up. Here we go, stuck here. And this is a playlist which is slightly different from the others, because what we have here is a curated on-demand news service where you can listen to the news whenever you want it, right? So I don't have to wait till the half hour. I can have my news whenever I want it, and it's updated 24 hours a day. We have a team of journalists working on this, but really what they're doing is getting the best of the content that's around the BBC. Fantastic journalism, both in live content and also in on-demand, and they're gathering it together. And I'll just show you how it works, hopefully here, once it goes back there. Here we go. So this was on the day that Boris Johnson was being grilled over whether he had a party or not in Downing Street.
Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lee Macaulay. On the way. Boris Johnson is facing MPs about parties held at Downing Street.
I'm just going to... Oops, hold on. That hasn't worked, sorry. It's going to play it again now. Sorry about that. Bear with me a sec. Here we go. Right, okay, so what it is you can press play at the orange button and get the whole linear experience, or you can click and choose and work your way through. So if
Hello, this is BBC
Sorry, you're going to
News.
have to listen to
I'm
this
Lee
again
McCall.
now.
On the way.
Here we go.
Boris Johnson is facing MPs about party.
Each one of the headlines are themselves a modular bulletin, and they can kind of be cut and changed, or you can listen and skip through them. And if you go further on...
the COVID lockdown.
There we go.
An increase in inflation catches economists off guard.
Further on, it moves down to some of our what we call explainers. So where it says who's affected by rising inflation, that's clipped out of a live show, possibly the Today programme or World at One or some of our 5 Live Drive. And then the Boris Johnson's political future will be a feature that's just been clipped out and put there. And then we also are making podcasts specifically to go in here where it says 5 questions on inflation, so things that have a bit more of a kind of long tail. And then we're also adding our kind of key news title newscast in there. So what they should do really is you've got the headlines at the top, and then you've got some of the more kind of longer, richer content that really explains the kind of gives you more information about the headlines. As I said, you can have one long listening experience, or you can flick through to the titles that you want. And we're super excited about this. This is something we're starting, and we're really going to build on and develop, and it's going to change and morph kind of over the next year. And I'm really interested to see how this develops and whether we can move it into somewhere a little bit more prominent, hopefully, than where it is now. Okay, another thing, I'm just going to jump out of here. There we go, I can get away from there. Something that I have personally been involved in a great deal and I'm really, really passionate about is the work we've done for local stations across the UK. In England, we have 39 different regions and all having their own local radio station. And then we also have Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, our nations. And you'll notice that adds up to 42, not 43, so that's my mistake. But anyway, 42 local regions across the UK. We land in autumn this year. We launched Rails. So as Emma said, on Sounds we call them Rails. But if you go to the Sounds homepage and you are logged in, Sounds is a mandatory login experience. So everybody logs in with a postcode. It then provides to you the local rail from where you live, related to your postcode. In this instance, from Nottingham, you'll see you've got a feature that's provided from Radio Nottingham. They've turned it into a bit of on-demand content, just 3 minutes. They provided the image, they've uploaded that. You've got Nottingham Update, which is a news bulletin that happens 4 times a day from Radio Nottingham. You then have content that's related to Nottingham, right? So that's whether that's a guest or whether that's a "shut up and show more football" is a famous quote from, does anyone know who said that? No, good. It's the famous Nottingham Forest manager, who I can't remember his name. Anyway, that's basically a football show that happens weekly. And then we have a music show, which is all about just music from Nottingham that's been uploaded, so we have full rights to play that as well. So that really, it's the beginning. But what the great thing there is we have a place now on Sounds where local regions or local stations can have content especially for them, and they can start publishing and exploring. And for us, this is just the start, because we want to do lots more things. We want to really explore what type of content works for local people. Can we update it more often? How can we bring more news into there and make it somewhere that is a sort of a go-to destination and makes people feel like Sounds is more for them and where they live?
And I guess one of the other things here is this is also something we're thinking about a lot when it comes to enriching our metadata around content, not just produced by local stations, but also by the national networks. So one of the ways we're thinking about our metadata is there a particular region that would be most interested in this content that's on Radio 4, that's on Radio 1, so that we, in future iterations, can start feeding in content from all across our entire set of nations and national networks and everything like that. Also, obviously, thinking about how we can let people opt into areas. So if you move away to university but still want your sounds to be from your home, or change places for a job, or even are slightly closer to an English station but live over the border in Wales and want a Welsh experience on Sounds, those are the things we're thinking about for sort of the next iterations that come along.
Yeah, and one of the things of this sort of project is quite transformational in terms of work you have to do. Like, we had to train all 42 different radio stations on how to publish digitally, which people have been doing what they've been working in linear for a long time, and that is a process that's still happening. It's not just done, but is a work in progress. And I think one of the great things is that all of the local stations are now going to have bespoke sounds producers working with them. Not just with them. In each station will have its own dedicated sounds producer. So hopefully, I say, we'll really develop some of the content and really see where that's going to go.
And so now we're going to talk a little bit about growing our audience. Obviously, all of the things we talked about so far have been done with that in mind, but some specific things that have happened in the last year. So the first one is actually around the way that we've used live to try and create moments to come to Sounds. So particularly, we've pulled out here a competition that happened in January called the Jan Slam. Now, there was one this year, there was also one last year, and we've had things like the Radio 1 Murder Mystery, and we've actually used the technology that drives Sounds, while it is mostly simulcast with what's going out on FM, DAB, it is actually a separate stream. So what we were able to do here was put clues only in the sound stream, effectively just fading down that one part of the studio and fading up a different studio. But in practice, what that meant was, if people wanted to enter the competition, they needed to do it from Sounds. So it was a lovely incentive for audiences to get involved, to get tickets for things, to participate in like those live moments and have them come alive on Sounds for us.
Yeah, because the radio controllers are themselves incentivized. It's part of their remit, is to try and bring some of their audiences onto Sounds as well. So this is what really exciting about this and other things, particularly Radio 1, they've been really great at this, and Radio 2 with their piano sessions actually as well, are just using radio creatives, right, to come up with these ideas, because actually they're so good at that, aren't they? That's what they do day in, day out, is come up with really great creative ideas. And I think since we've been working more closely and collaboratively with them, I feel like the ideas have definitely got much better.
And then one of the other things that we did was take a handful of titles last year and make them available on Sounds immediately after broadcast, but then have their normal RSS release 28 days later. So it's not something that everyone, it's an experiment we were trying, and obviously of our sadly 1,200 plus RSS feeds that we're currently maintaining at the BBC, it was 6 to 8 of them that we did this with. We did pick some things that we thought had the most chance of having some evergreen appeal, so they would still have value on RSS, even with that delay built in, but that we'd add that extra bit of, the content advantage for Sounds is that you get that immediately on Sounds. So it's been an experiment that we were really particularly keen to make sure that the cost of bringing some people to Sounds didn't deter huge amounts of people didn't send them other places. So we tracked really closely what was the engagement rate like on Sounds combined with RSS beforehand, what was it like during the trial and now. And the really great thing for us is that overall across this set of podcasts, we actually saw engagements increase. So in part, that was down to the fact that we made specific commitments to these shows to make sure that they were really prominent in the app, that when you logged in, when new people came, they'd be able to very quickly find the thing that they were looking for. So they got a lot of front page prominence, and that meant that while, obviously the job was to try and get people to try Sounds who would normally listen on RSS, and it seems to have worked for us. So it's obviously something that, as things move on, we'll look at how we distribute things. It's part of the very big and broad mix of things we do to release stuff. It is not at all the first step in putting everything just on Sounds forever, full stop, no returns. It's absolutely part of that mix of tactics and experiments to see what our audiences want to do and what we can help them to, what incentives can we give them to come to Sounds.
Another thing we've done successfully to grow our audience is a lot of work on smart speakers. And feels like smart speakers were the Radiodays hot topic about, 5 years ago, and now it's AI. But we're still committed to smart speakers in a really big way at the BBC. Particularly last year, we put all our Alexa specifically, because Alexa is our dominant platform, that we put behind mandatory sign-in. So the rest of Sounds has mandatory sign-in, and now Alexa is too. And clearly that made quite a significant boost to our audience figures in terms of on Sounds specifically. But we've also done a lot of developments on Alexa, which we're really, really proud of. We have what's called a custom skill, which means we play podcasts and also live content, and it's the biggest custom skill in the world, apparently. And we can get it to do a number of things. So you can ask BBC Sounds to play a specific title, and if you're signed in, you can start on Alexa and you can pick up where you left off on a mobile, for example, or on web. You can also ask for first episode, but one of the things we're really pleased about is you can now, you're listening, you can restart that title, but if you're listening live, and this is one of our new developments, you can say, Alexa, can you ask BBC Sounds to rewind by 5 minutes? And I think we can all go, that's a really great use case. I've just missed a goal, just missed the beginning of the news, I've just, et cetera, et cetera. I want to rewind by 5 minutes, and then you can say, Alexa, return to live, or Alexa, restart the program, and it goes to the beginning of that program. And I think that's a really brilliant use case for, we know we can do that in mobile, and we can do that on web, but we haven't never seen that elsewhere on Alexa.
The tech people do say it's a world first, but obviously we're open to be corrected on that.
We don't know. But yeah, it's really cool, and it works really well. And we've got lots of other ideas and ways to integrate Alexa going forward.
Okay, so then thinking very quickly about what's coming up. So building on the work that's happened in 2022, where are we headed this year?
I mean, fundamentally, we want to be the best listening experience. We want to have an immersive listening experience. We want to be a very rich live listening experience. We want to be the best that we possibly can, and with the best possible content, and delivering best sort of British, culture to our British and our global audiences. And I think how we're going to do that is, we've been working really, really hard as a department to really look at kind of how do we grow. We've grown, as I said, last year is our record year. The last few months we've seen continued growth, and we are on a trajectory that is, I think, really impressive, and we're all kind of motivated as a team to continue that growth.
And so for us, that obviously means having some big podcast commissions coming. There's always a great pipeline of work coming through, but particularly also thinking about growing sounds everywhere. So last year, Sounds launched on PS5, the latest Sony console. Our Sonos experience was developed. People are thinking about in-car. Our TV team are always doing a lot of experimentation with the TV app to see what works for engagement. They've added a sounds link into the electronic program guide on TV. So quite often when you, certainly in the UK, you scroll past all the TV stations, you get to the radio stations, and now there's a prompt that will be rolled out even further that will say, if you want to listen from the start, press red for BBC Sounds. So those types of things, finding new channels in, new ways to connect with the audience are a big part of what we want to do this year.
Yeah, and we saw, as part of our kind of record numbers last year, a lot of that was driven around news, massive news year for us, particularly in the UK, but also big sports year. And those news, sports and entertainment are our big peaks. So we are expecting a big peak around Eurovision. We expect a big peak when there's, a big news announcement. And we want to think about clever, innovative ways we can encourage people to interact, to listen, to kind of get more engaged with sounds, and I suppose make sounds a better experience for news, sport, and entertainment.
And as far as the acquisitions go, we're open for business there and definitely looking to scale that up through the year, build new partnerships with particularly UK podcasters.
So yeah, if you've got a podcast, speak to Emma. And I think the other thing, finally, is just a culture of experimentation within sounds. We have, we have the ability to A/B test new features on sounds. We want to try new things out. There's a big R&D team within the BBC. We want to collaborate with a bit more. We want to try and be open for partnerships outside of the BBC. I've had some amazing conversations since being here, and lots of you are doing really exciting work, and you kind of blow my mind, and I'd love to kind of speak to you more and pick up on some of that. And so I think really we want to be a place that is, it's difficult working with a big organisation. We can move quite slowly and we can be quite cumbersome, but at the same time there is a willingness and an openness from people who work there to continue to experiment, particularly with a focus on audience growth. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's it from us.
I think we've got some time for some questions. Yep.
I'll run round. Let's go. Please, when you ask a question, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then go for it.
Hi, I'm Tina. I'm at Danish Radio. And thank you for a great presentation. It's really impressive what you're doing. I was just wondering, of all the things you're doing across commissioning, publishing tactics, features and whatever, what do you think is the 3 most important things for growing sounds?
So, I can speak to what worked best for us last year. So things like being able to see listeners who were already there, turning on mandatory sign-in for Alexa was a huge driver of essentially signed in growth, because we suddenly saw people who were already engaged with us. And that's not an amazing tactic in terms of actually attracting new people. That's just being able to see the ones who are there. But being able to count them is a great step forward. In reality, the delaying RSS release also did a lot for us in terms of being able to bring in people to try sounds and hopefully to stick with us. As I said, with acquisitions, that's not a new listener to draw. That's keeping the people you've got.
There's a few small things as well which I haven't mentioned. We've done things like push notifications on the app. So when you've subscribed to things, and if a new episode comes up, you might get a notification. And we're looking at kind of automating them and developing them a bit further. I think that's a really good technique. We're experimenting about where we place things in the app around continue listening. It is actually a very popular way of kind of keeping people listening for longer, and we're looking to kind of move that further up the app. So there's a lot of kind of small techniques and small nudges I think we're doing. But I think the other thing that's really important is just really, really good content, like really great big titles that do a job. The Coming Storm did a really good job for us in terms of narrative journalism. fantastic long-running titles. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know here. Great live radio that has clever promotional, opportunities and good talent that know how to talk about your content and talk about the app and things on air. So it's just every little single thing needs to be done to perfection in many ways. And then coming up with big, bold, ambitious moves, a bit like the mandatory sign-in, right? I mean, I can tell you because I worked on that for a long time. Pretty much 90% of the product team did not want to do that because they felt that the audience will be upset. You know, they're not going to like this. You know, you're going to have to get them to do things. It's going to be a big turn-off. And in the end, you have to make some really tough decisions. And actually, it's been really useful. And I think everybody is, now happy and on board, and it's been successful.
Oh, hi, I'm Hannah, so I'm looking after podcast at Red Bull. My question is, you're looking at kind of Alexa and places where people are wanting to discover, basically you're focusing on those areas. How about other areas in the digital ecosystem of BBC, like the news apps or the editorial, the stories, kind of written stories? What are your kind of biggest thinkings of how to get BBC sounds into those kind of areas?
So the history of BBC is in terms of we essentially have 6 core apps, which are Sounds, iPlayer, News, Sport, Children's, and Weather. And historically, they've had all their own dev teams, all working really separately. So we've done some sort of individual tactics. So it might be that things like, one of the ways that we worked really hard to support some of the acquisitions would be commissioning articles that we could then, put on different radio, but try and get things across to news if there was news things, and we haven't always been really good at being joined up, I guess is what I'm saying. But at a higher level, we're now thinking about that much more clearly. I think that hasn't been a really good focus for us. Like, Sounds has been focused on sounds, when potentially we should be thinking more about one BBC and joined up technology, and particularly links between services. Some of that comes down to metadata, that we've had one metadata, this is very technical, but we've had one metadata system that described audio and visual content, and a completely different platform to talk about news and sport. And so they couldn't even link up topics in those things because they weren't the same system. So now we've got another metadata system coming over the top, which allows us to use one language to talk about every single type of content, and any content that the BBC makes can now be described using one language, one tool. So it means that in the future, absolutely, we'll be looking at topic pages and things like that cover all kinds of BBC media together, because that is a really important focus for the future for us.
We've probably got time for one more question. Does anyone have one? Yes. Great.
Hi, Steve Ahern, Radio Info and ABC. Have you worked out a way to get the Alexa commands into more natural voice? Saying, Alexa, ask BBC to rewind by 5 minutes. If you were talking to Alexa, you would just say rewind.
Yeah. No, obviously that's an Amazon, it's an Amazon situation, and we are bound by what they want to do. And it is really difficult because we have to then market that. And I think you're absolutely right. We've got some fantastic services that we offer, but having to market and tell people about those commands. I think you can say Alexa restart, which is the rest of them you have to say Alexa ask BBC Sounds 2. Now when you're trying to market something, you can't say, you can say this over here, but you can say, so it's actually much easier to say, you have to say Alexa ask BBC Sounds 2. Like, it's not ideal, but that's where we are. We do have turbos, so you can say play Radio 1, play Radio 2. So those are brilliant, and that's why live radio dominates on the Alexa platform, because it's hard to find on demand and hard to remember what you're looking for and what you're getting. But it's creeping up. We are seeing improvements. The other thing worth saying, we are in the middle of doing a series of big advertising campaigns on our radio stations to support those commands and to support how you listen and that flexibility, because it is. I'm going to say something controversial, but it is a better experience than DAB in that way, because you can rewind and because you can pause. It's not to say we want to stop people listening on DAB, we don't. But we want to explain that there are really good use cases for listening on smart speakers, should you have one.
Great, and I think that's probably about all we've got time for. Thank you, Nicky. Thank you, Emma. Thanks, guys.